Hi, folks. So we're continuing this sort of history of the automobile industry, and I hope you get my cap on my pen here. Hope you sort of realize that we're not turning this course into a to an automobile course. What we're turning this course into is a sort of looking at the basics and the foundations of collaboration and how we work together. As we started with Henry Ford, pretty obviously that. Henry Ford had built this giant monster machine in the case of the Rouge plant that ultimately, at peak performance, hired and employed 80,000 people. That was, working 24 hours a day. So that was three different shifts and plus backups. That's a lot of people to be collaborating at the same time on a particular project. And again, the particular project that Henry Ford had early on was to just make the Model T. It's kind of hard to understand now in 2014 how you could go about making a single product for 20 years straight. They didn't change the design. They didn't change the particular basic materials. And for 20 years, you just made the same car day in and day out. And we saw some of the problems, especially with the employees that worked with Henry Ford, how mind-numbingly boring that came, and sort of squashed creativity and turned people into machines, which was an amazingly bad idea. That's sort of a general theme of collaborating. You don't want to use people as robots. If you have a job for a robot, especially in 2014 with all of our technology, you simply design a robot and then hire a robot for that job. But back in the day, that's all we had. We didn't have the technology yet to build robots, so people had to fill in that place. As we saw, as we worked through the history of the Ford Motor Company, Ford had sort of a competition with the General Motors Corporation, as we saw, which was several brands of automobiles manufacturing companies at the same time under one umbrella. In the case of Alfred P. Sloan, hopefully you've already noticed, and if you saw Alfred Sloan's Wikipedia article, his name, the Sloan School of Management, is the name that's on the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The MIT business school is called the Sloan School of Management. So they're still around. It's still 2014, and the Sloan School is still going strong. But of course, Alfred Sloan was very, very popular in the last century. And we learned there that Alfred Sloan brought in this idea of competition for Ford, but also not making the same exact product for 20 years straight. He sort of brought up this idea of making things change, and maybe even change annually, so that after someone buys a car in, say, 1930, after about 33 or 34, the design would be so different that people would want to buy a new car because the change has happened. We see that now with as we're racing technology, especially with the iPhone lines. The difference between an iPhone 4 and an iPhone 5 and an iPhone 6 and the S version of each of those is sometimes it's a lot of technology, sometimes it's very little. It's just people want the latest and greatest things. And of course, we also saw that Alfred Sloan had introduced and sort of capitalized on this idea of planned obsolescence, where the design got old or the part itself wasn't designed to last forever. Henry Ford in his Model T wanted to make a very affordable, very robust. Anybody could buy one and it would last for 50, 60 years, depending on how much it rusted out. But in the case of Alfred Sloan, not suggesting he made it cheaply, it's just that he would make parts of the car that would only last a few years, and they'd start to fall apart. And again, in a way to get folks to come back and buy a newer version. Maybe that's not the best way to go, but that was his invention or his idea. After Ford started getting competition from another player like Alfred Sloan, we saw that his son Edsel Ford, who was a designer, came along and said, "Hey, Dad, we need to change things." And they went away for 6 months, retooled the entire plant, and came back and were able to produce the Model A. It was a different design. It had a little bit more features, a little more comfort features for customers. But of course, shutting down the entire Rouge plant for 6 months to come up with a new version, you're not going to see the Ford Motor Company back in those early days come out with the latest model year. They'd be closed for half the year, and then only making cars for the next half of the year while they had to close down again for the next model year. So it's obviously something had to change. So Fred, not Alfred Sloan, but the Ford Motor Company had Edsel Ford. So Henry had Edsel, his son Edsel, to help design, and then we saw that Alfred Sloan had a designer that was not related to him, but a very famous designer. His name was Harley Earl, and Harley Earl was his designer. So we see a quick pattern of sort of pairs of people, two people, Henry Ford and Edsel Ford, and then Alfred Sloan and Harley Earl together to make these things happen. So keep that in mind. Having pairs of people or partners seems to have a pretty big impact on how we collaborate and make things happen. So the history of the automobile, definitely here in the United States, but there was actually lots of competition from coming overseas, specifically Japan. Obviously, we fought a world war against the Japanese Empire during World War II. So there was some years where there wasn't a bunch of exports happening. But after World War II, things settled down pretty quickly. And we were able to sort of follow the history of another manufacturer, another engine manufacturer, another engineer in Japan. If I say this right, Sakeichi Toyoda with a D. They later on changed the name to Toyota with a T. But the Toyota motor company or automobile company was just as big in Japan, just like Ford and General Motors was here in the United States. And just like the pattern of Henry Ford and Edsel Ford being a duo of sort of engineer and designer, and Alfred Sloan and Harley Earl being a duo of engineer and designer, the Toyota company, through various sons of the Sakeichi Toyoda, the very famous designer there in Toyota company is Taiichi Ono is his name. So what I'd like you to do is work through this next set of videos, look at the history of the Toyota company, look for some similarities to how things got developed here in the United States. It turns out that obviously we still have the Toyota Motor Company in the United States here in 2014. It's a pretty big player. They manufacture a lot of cars here in the United States. But it turns out that just like Alfred Sloan had a large impact on how we work things in business, so did Toyota. In fact, we've adopted a lot of the Japanese terms in collaborative development and project management that are Japanese originally terms. And so obviously, if you're not a Japanese speaker, they might sound a little goofy or a little foreign because they're not from a Germanic language like German or English. So if you would work through the next video, and then I'll see you on the other side. Let me push the button here. Fantastic. Thanks.